Okay, welcome to part 3 of the week 3 lecture. We're going to pick up Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework. At the same time that National Quality Standards and the National Framework was being developed, the Victorian Government was developing its own learning and development framework, as was South Australia. The principal practices are very, very similar. Probably the biggest difference between the two documents is that the national framework is birth to 5 years, whereas the Victorian framework is birth to 8 years. The Victorian framework, in a similar fashion to the National Quality Standards framework, recognises that children's learning and development takes place in the context of their families. That families are the child's first and foremost important educators. It acknowledges diversity, and it recognises and respects Aboriginal cultures. It talks about a range of services that children will access. Now that includes playgroups, and often playgroups are run by maternal and child health centres, or they may be run in kindergartens, sometimes the Victorian Playgroup Association, set up in a whole variety of ways. They still need to now come underneath these particular frameworks. Long daycare centres are included. Family daycare. Family daycare is where a carer works from their home and has a number of children come into their home on a regular basis who are cared for within that environment. Those family daycare centres are set up under the auspices of quite often local council, who will ensure that the carers in those particular homes are of the particular standard that they need to be, that the homes have been assessed for safety, all those things that actually match in terms of the frameworks we're talking about now. Occasional care and occasional care centres or settings or rooms within settings are set up to care for children for short periods of time, where it might be that their parents will be going off for medical appointments or in shopping centres or in gym and a whole variety of those sorts of things. So if we think about the Children's Hospital, they at one stage had an occasional care space for siblings to be looked after while parents and an unwell child went off to their appointments. They would come back after a couple of hours and pick their children up and head off home. Out of school hours care, which most of you know about, kindergartens and schools. What is also included in the framework were sporting clubs, community education and cultural organisations such as libraries, museums, botanic gardens, galleries, zoos, anywhere where children would be joined together for a group based on a series of categories and practice principles. And I've put the categories up there and looked at some of the practice principles around that. So you've got the 3 categories being collaborative, effective and reflective, and the 8 practice principles being family-centred practice, partnerships with professionals, high expectations for every child, equity and diversity, respectful relationships and responsive engagement, integrated teaching and learning approaches, assessment for learning and development, and reflective practice. The Early Learning Years Learning and Development Framework suggests that these are the outcomes for learning for children. That children will have a strong sense of identity, that children are connected with and contribute to their world, that children will have a sense of well-being, that children are confident, involved learners and are effective communicators. It's important to keep those in mind when we start looking at the next document, which is the Early Learning Years Framework National Document, the National Quality Standards, and to see where's the balance between the two, where the similarities between the two. And when you keep these in mind and look at the next component of that in terms of the national document, you'll see that the similarities are very, very strong, very, very clear. So this is the national framework, or the figure that's used most frequently in describing the national framework. So the National Early Learning Years Framework is part of the COAG agenda for early education and care. And this is where we start talking about how important it is for you to start gearing in or tuning in to conversations that are being held politically about education and early childhood. That all the conversations that are coming out of the Prime Minister's office and Christopher Pyne's office at the moment, and in terms of the Minister for Early Childhood, they're the conversations you need to be listening to, because it will impact your practice at some given point. This particular framework is a key component of the National Quality Framework for Early Education and Care. It was implemented only recently. It came out in 2009 and has been on a reasonably slow rollout before people were asked to accredit themselves against this particular framework. First time in this country we've had a national framework for early childhood, so for many of us it was a very exciting time. We were thrilled to finally see that we had something that was standard across the country rather than fragmented within each state. The framework underpins universal access to early childhood education and is incorporated in the NQS. Now, in terms of universal access, that's where we're saying that the Labor government was suggesting that all children should have at least 1 year preschool education before going to school. And that is where universal access became very important. So this was particularly about preschool education, and that's when we started getting some kindergarten programs running in long day care. Strong emphasis based on play-based learning, and the document actually describes play as being the best vehicle for young children's learning, providing the most appropriate stimulus for brain development. It recognises the importance of communication and language, including early literacy and numeracy. Now that doesn't mean at this stage children should be counting or should be reading, but it's about early literacy and numeracy and social and emotional development. The framework was established to help providers improve their services in areas that impact a child's development. And it's about empowering families to make informed choices about the sorts of service they might use for their child and what might be best for their child. Now, when I was talking about improving their services, this is clearly linked to a national quality improvement framework. That comes in with it. So the whole national quality standard includes a number of components. The first is the national legislative framework. So we now have this enshrined in law. There's a legislation around how this is accredited and used. We have a national quality standard. We have an assessment and rating system. For kindergartens, this was the first time this had happened. Long day care had their own assessment system for a period of time. That has now finished. We're now all using the same one no matter where you work in early childhood. There's a regulatory authority in each state, and that was deemed important because it's a little bit hard to run it all out of Canberra or out of New South Wales, and you'll see a lot of these documents sit in New South Wales archives. Now that regulatory authority is primarily responsible for the approval, the monitoring and the quality assessment of all the services, and they will feed that information up into the EDCU body, which is the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority. We talk about EDCU a lot, so you need to have that acronym in your head. Now they're the body who oversees the system and ensures some consistency. So when we talk about improving quality, EDCU and the National Quality Standards were set up to ensure that quality was going to improve in early childhood services, and we're going to have some sort of standard across the systems. The ideas behind what they're looking for were that they believed if we improve the ratios, that is, had more staff, less children, or the same amount of children's services but more staff to work with those children, that we would have a better service and better outcome for children. We do know that children work better when they've got those lower ratios. The ratios were very important. They're strong, very clear sticking points between a number of states because it meant for some states all of a sudden they needed to have more staff, which meant there were some problems in terms of how many staff they would need to employ, and employing more staff means fees would go up, especially if it's a fee-based service. Some of the free services or the services require less fees. It wasn't so much of a problem, but some of those services that ran purely on fees, it was a bit of an issue. There was also the national qualification standards change. So all of a sudden we were saying it was okay to have people with a particular qualification. Now we're saying bachelor trained for a lot of what we have in early childhood. Kindergarten's already had the bachelor trained but long day care didn't necessarily, and now they need to do that. So that became another sticking point in these discussions. The new quality rating system was seen as a way of enforcing some of that quality standards, that you would actually be measured against quality standards, and that would be part of how you're assessed. EDCU again was that establishment of an authority, a regulatory body that was going to be looking at that. And we link the national learning frameworks, linking the frameworks and recognising that children learn from birth. The frameworks don't tell you what to teach. They inform and guide you in delivery of your programs. So you have a framework in where you can work within to help support you in making some of those decisions. We have put on, Leo, for you a copy of the frameworks, the Belonging, Being, Becoming document, for you to download and to keep. We recommend you don't just leave it on your desktop, you actually have it in a hard copy somewhere. This is probably one of the times I tell you to go and buy some plastic sheets and stick it in plastic sheets into a ring binder. You don't want to lose those bits of paper because you will be using them a lot in the second half of this particular unit and ongoing when you start planning until you have them ingrained. So you really need to know them and know them well. We've also given you the frameworks as they're written up for parents, so you understand what the parents have been told about the frameworks and what that means for their children in care and education. So download that and keep it. As I said before, the key to the National Quality Standards really is around continuous quality improvement. So what the government are now saying, the sector are now saying, is no matter where you sit in the rating scales, no matter how good your centre is, you still need to keep on finding ways to improve. So they will come in expecting to see a quality improvement plan for something, for some people, for some services, for a number of things. Now, centres assess themselves against the criteria. So they'll have the criteria in front of them. You do a self-assessment. And it can take you a while to work through that document, quite a while, over a few months. We now argue that you should be doing this all the time, that if you've got quality improvement plans in place, that you'll be working and chipping away at those. So you've got something in writing and some change evident all the time. So when it comes to the time you need to do your self-assessment, the paperwork's already there. Once that paperwork goes in, the validator attends a centre to verify the self-assessment against what they see in the program. So they'll have the self-assessment in one hand, observe or check the evidence while they're there to make sure there's a match. They take that away, they sit down and they give the centre a rating. Now that list on the other side of your PowerPoint there are the ratings you may get. Now, you don't want to be in that significant improvement required because you have time frames about when the improvement's expected and you need to be able to meet some benchmarks around that. That's not a good place to be sitting. You want to be at least at meeting the NQS or exceeding it. Excellent's a hard rating to get and it needs to be verified. You know, it might be the validator says that it's an excellent service, but somebody else will come in and verify that excellent elephant stamps aren't being given all that easily and all that readily. The National Quality Standards, the quality areas should be working towards, and educationals around they will look at the educational program and practice. They will look at what you're doing around children's health and safety. Again, they are documented very clearly in that document I've suggested you download. You need to have a look at those. They will actually have a look at your physical environment to make sure it is in part safe but also challenging for children. Go back to my tree slides from a couple of these short segments you've been watching over the last few days. Think about staffing arrangements and what that can be like. Are you doing it appropriately? Are children perhaps linked to a primary carer and that you organise your staffing around when those children are in so that actually meets the children's needs? Ratios are correct, the qualifications are correct. Some relationships with children, they will be looking at that, and also the leadership and service management. Two different things there. Leadership is different from service management, but they will look at both. And you need to provide evidence, if you're working in a centre, that shows that you're able to achieve these quality standards. Just looking at how it's set up, that the principals view every child as a competent learner actually from birth, not from 5, where some people seem to think children start to learn. Children start to learn from birth. So the standards actually look at that. They're looking for children who can be resilient and capable and confident and self-assured within where they should be at that given age and stage. It recognises that each child learns to be strong and independent from a base of loving and secure relationships with a family or primary caregiver. Back to the slides and discussions on attachment theory and how important it was to have that attachment. So as well as talking about that bond between parent and child, there needs to be a bond between the carer and the child and children. Without that bond, you don't have that safe, secure, reciprocal relationship. You don't have that that base from which to build with your children you're working with. The principles identify the environment as playing a key role in supporting and extending children's development and learning. Think back to Reggio Emilia, who talked about just that the environment is almost a third teacher. And it's the words they use, and we're suggesting something similar in the programs we're running. The principles acknowledge that children learn and develop in different ways and at different rates. So we're not expecting all children at the age of 6 months to be sitting up, which is developmentally when they should be doing it. Some children will be doing later, some might do it earlier. The same for walking, the same for a whole variety of developmental milestones that children will be expected to achieve at some point. And it recognises that all areas of learning and development are equally important and interconnected. So I'm just starting with this one here, which we identify as appropriate early childhood pedagogy. The 5 principles that reflect the research evidence are that there's secure, respectful and reciprocal relationships, strong partnerships, high expectations and equity, that respect for diversity, ongoing learning and reflective practice. There are 8 aspects of practice and 5 learning outcomes under the quality standards. Looking at this and looking at the 8, so what we've got in the previous slide with the 5 principles that reflect the research evidence, now we've got the 8 aspects of practice. What it's saying is that as educators, it's important that we consider a number of aspects when we're working with children. We need to know how to identify what's happening in relation to children's development and what may not be happening in relation to children's development. Do we need to think about referring this child on for further assessment because things aren't quite going the way they should be? Or is it just that this child is taking their time to achieve those developmental milestones? So we just need to identify what's going to happen with those children. It's important we consider the development of each child's disposition for learning. That's how children learn, what's of interest to them, how to give each child opportunities to become independent. We need to consider ways to encourage children to make choices and ways to encourage them to make decisions. So rather than telling them what to do, how can they make a decision about how they're going to engage in particular types of play, how they're going to engage with particular types of people and different people, how they're going to make that choice between one activity and another activity, between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing, if you want to think about some of that stuff about moral behaviour and moral ways of working with others. How to engage children to be part of the social context they're in, wherever that context is, and the changing context they may be in. So it may not be the same this afternoon as it was this morning. They could be in a different place. How each child shows development communicating in terms of the levels of literacy, numeracy. Again, not saying that young children should be able to read and write, but they should be engaging in numeracy. They should be engaging in literacy, and that might be storybooks as you're doing in your activity rounds. It might be counting, matching, sorting. These are all math skills which they might be engaging in without really knowing it's math. And ways in which the child's encouraged to become independent, active and inquisitive learners. Once we know children can do that, we know that they are going to engage in activities. So in terms of aspects of practice, we're looking for how we're responsive to children, how we plan and implement learning through play. And again, that brings us back to what we're doing with our planning activities, about how we do that and how we ensure that the activities are playful. How we engage in intentional teaching, and that's something that starts to come through when you're engaging with children and all of a sudden we have a conversation about a birthday and that Play-Doh becomes a birthday cake and we start counting candles on the birthday cake. Taking those opportunities to teach as a teaching moment. How we use the space and the environment to have an impact on children's learning. Again, Reggio Emilia, very clearly that comes from there, or certainly the physical aspect of it comes from there. How we can communicate across cultures and understand other cultures and work within other cultures. And a lot of stuff, I'm going to use the last one there, about assessing, monitoring children's learning to inform documentation and planning to support the outcomes. In saying that, that's what we're going to do in the second part of the semester, where we start observing children in play and we document that and then link that to planning our activities. So that idea we're taking at the moment about planning a play activity, we're going to start building around that to show you how you can actually observe children and then use that information to plan an activity that's actually going to support them in achieving those outcomes. The National Quality Standards in terms of the Learning Outcomes 5, and this is where it slots down. So we've drilled down for the principles, for the aspects of practice into the learning outcomes. And these are which you plan and use to assess the effectiveness of your activities that you're engaging with children. The learning outcomes are, I'm going to quote, a skill, knowledge or disposition that educators can actively promote in early childhood settings in collaboration with children and families. So the learning outcomes are designed to capture the integrated and complex learning and development across the age range that we're working with. The outcomes are broad, very, very broad, and the outcomes are clearly observable. You can start to see that in the way that children are engaging, whether a child is confident. If they hold back and don't engage in learning, or don't engage in activities, they may not be that confident and involved learner. But if they do crawl across the room and engage in another activity, that's a child that's quite confident and quite happy to do that and has probably a reasonably strong sense of self and identifies who they are. So you can actually see them starting to do that. And I'd almost say connect with and contribute to their world. So this is a child who's actually quite happy to engage with their world, knows a little bit who they are, quite confident to be able to go somewhere and try something else, and it's quite a clear sense of identity. You can probably, in that small idea of a child engaging in an activity they see somewhere else and crawling across the room to do that, link to 4 learning outcomes for a child about the stage of a child who's crawling. So we're looking at around that 8 months mark. Okay, in terms of strong sense of identity, and I want to just take that drilling down through to that, take that one learning outcome and have a look at what that may look like. What happens at this point is that they will give you some ideas of what that may look like for children. So children who have a strong sense of identity will feel safe, secure and supported, and you see that how they engage. They are quite resilient, interdependent, have a sense of agency. They're quite confident in their self-identity. You see them developing knowledge. They know when they pick up that particular toy and do something with it that this is going to happen. You can see that in how they engage with the toy. And then as they use it in the way it was intended perhaps, or they use it with their own intent. That is, that they might pick up a block which we know to be used for stacking, but they may start to use it as a telephone. That is children showing how they develop some knowledge and transferring to an innate object. Children learn to interact in relation to others with care, empathy and respect. So these are the things you'll be looking for with a child to be able to have a bit of an idea of, do they have a strong sense of identity? Am I seeing that in how this child's developing? And it's written up this way in, and this is part of how they've written it up in the frameworks, just to give you an idea. So we know that children are safe, secure and supported when a child builds secure attachments with one and then more familiar educators. So especially for young children, that secure attachment with perhaps their primary caregiver in an early childhood space, and then perhaps another caregiver in that space. When those attachments appear to be kind of strong, then you know that it's evident that this child feels safe in that space. When the children start to use routines to help make transitions, then you also know that the child feels safe in that space. Routines to help make transitions is really important. When I talk about transitions, it's not just from an early childhood service to a school, or it might be from one room to another in an early childhood service. It might be from sitting on the mat to going to wash their hands to have something to eat, those sorts of transitions too. So when those transitions happen in a predicted and smooth way, you know that children actually are feeling quite comfortable in that space. How do we promote that as an educator? And this is just to give you an idea what that looks like. It's that we can acknowledge and respond to children's cues and signals. It might be for those children who are verbal, they'll tell us how they're feeling and respond to that. It might be for non-verbal children, a bit of a cry or a whimper. It suggests we need to go and do something for that child or be with that child for a period of time. Those sorts of things are the things to be looking for. It might even be a gurgle rather than just a whimper. We don't want to respond just to negative stuff. We might want to respond to some of the positive cues that they're giving with us as well. So thinking about how we respond to children's cues and signals and what they might be, keeping in mind all children's cues and signals are different, and we might need to talk to parents about what they are. It might be that we respond to children's attempts to initiate interactions, however they do that, and to initiate conversations. It's important you start to understand these because you're going to be putting them into your plans for activities with children in the unit, but then you will use them again when we start talking about planning for your placement later this year. And you use them in terms of how you evaluate the activities and how you measure the success of that activity. Learning is influenced by each child's current capabilities, dispositions, and learning preferences. Learning is influenced by educators' practices and the early childhood environment. It is influenced by encouragement with each child's family and the community, and the integration of learning across the outcomes, not simply a description of what happened. And this, in a way, brings us to reflections where we don't describe just what's happened, but we reflect on what's going on. I've decided, just to finish that learning is not always linear and it's not always predictable. But when we know where children are at, we've got a bit of an idea of where it might go, but it needs to be meaningful for that child. I've chosen to use this slide because I particularly like it when we start thinking about what children may or may not be learning from an activity. This one for me shows very clearly that children are developing gross motor skills. Hopping is not easy. It is a complex activity for children. They need to learn to balance on one foot and how to propel themselves forward, again on one foot. Children don't do that easily to start with, but with practice it starts to come. The other thing this activity has done is it's very much a math numeracy activity. They might not be counting to 22 or 23 or 24 at this stage. They might be. But they know that the numbers are there. So they're following the numbers and they know that numbers change as they get bigger. They might be doing those counting. Somebody might be counting with them. Intentional teaching. That every time somebody jumps into a particular square, the number's actually given off. So as children start hearing the word, recognising the numeral on the hopscotch that they've got going there. It's a lovely little example of how you combine a couple of learning outcomes with children, how you actually start working on some of those aspects. So if I was looking at your centre and I saw that occurring, I know that there's some work going on around numeracy, which is kind of nice. Okay, your reference list for this week is SLE, and there were certain parts of SLE we wanted you to have a look at. The Early Years Learning Framework and Practice, I apologise for the spelling mistake in that slide for that document. We've given that to you on Leo. And COAG's document, Belonging, Being, Becoming, please download that and get hold of that. There is as this is an online lecture this week, there is also online tutorials. So you will need to go into the Leo site. We've given you some more videos, very short ones. Don't panic when you see how many there are there. Some short videos about the National Quality Standards. We'd like you to go and have a look at those. You might want to do some more reading on them. We then have a question for you to answer as a wiki. So you click on wiki, have a look at the questions, see if you can develop, actually don't have to click on it just yet, have a look at the questions, develop a response to that. There's 2 questions there, choose which one you'd like to develop a response to. You then need to put it into the wiki. It's not hard to do, just click on wiki, make sure you change it to your group. It should come up with your group anyway. Don't click on all participants and don't click on the number. Click on the drop down and make sure your group comes up. You shouldn't have any other groups come up anyway, but make sure that it is correct. Post your response. Once you've done that, you will need to respond to somebody else's wiki as well. So this is a 2-part. You put in a response and then you have a look at somebody else's respond to that. Don't respond if there's another response already there. You'll see it very clearly. Go to the next one down and respond to that one where there is no response. So everybody will make one response, their own response, and you'll respond to one other. And everybody will therefore receive a response. The earlier you do this, the more time you've got to do the second response. So consider putting it up reasonably quickly. By delaying putting it up, you're putting the others at risk of not being able to respond to somebody else's. So you need to do both parts of this to have that marked against your attendance. Keeping in mind then in week 4, you need to bring in with you a copy of your design at this stage for your poster, what you might be putting up on that poster for submission in a couple of weeks after that. We need to see that. You're going to get some feedback on where you're at with that from your peers. So a reasonably decent fist, probably a really good strong first draft of that poster to bring that in. That is for that week as well. So we're getting to the stage where we're going to be thinking about getting ready for submission for that particular part on play. If you haven't started doing that, you've got this week to get something clearly set up for a framework for what you want to do if you want some reasonable feedback for that particular activity. Okay, thank you for listening, and we'll be seeing you all next week. There's your prior to week 4. I'll add to that for my apologies. Review your podcast of week 2 lecture on Leo if you're required to. Go back and play this again if you need to. After the tutorial, complete your week 3 reflection, upload it into your Leo portfolio. Read and consider readings for week 4. Feels like a fair bit, and there's that bit. Ensure your plan for your play poster is ready for your peer review for next week. Okay, now I'm going to say it. Look forward to seeing you next week.